Conrad Green ran across the wet, sloping lead roof of the banqueting house, his breath misting in the cool night air. Moonlight flashed on metal to his right. He caught a glimpse of a blade falling toward his neck and ducked. The sword skimmed past his head with a faint hum. Feet skidding on the slick surface, he spun around, dropped to one knee, and lifted the short, silver-gilded staff in his hands. A grunt sounded above him as the burly swordsman brought his weapon down once more. The edge of the blade struck the staff hard, raising sparks in the gloom. The man's lips pulled back in a vicious grin, exposing 2 uneven rows of stained teeth. The muscles and veins in his neck and arms bulged with superhuman strength as he drove the sword into the staff. Conrad's elbows slowly folded toward his chest. Air left his lips in a low hiss as the tip of the man's blade inched closer to his left eye. He pushed back with the staff with all his might. Dark spots dancing across his vision. A figure dashed past them on the left. Conrad caught a glimpse of soft brown curls. His heart stuttered inside his chest. He swore, fell back, and rolled out of the way of the falling blade. He landed close to the balustrade that ran around the top of the building and climbed swiftly to his feet. Ignoring the swordsman charging toward him, he peered through the rainfall at the dark shapes engaged in a fast-paced and deadly battle on the moonlit rooftop. His eyes sought and found the woman who had run by him. She was almost at the north end of the terrace, where a young man with brown hair and eyes stood confronted by 3 armed attackers. Blood from the wounds on his left shoulder and flank had already soaked through his long-sleeved ruffled shirt and stained his leather jerkin. "William!" the woman yelled, her voice edged with fear and desperation. She passed the weather vane on the sloping roof and unsheathed the rapier at her waist. Relief darted across the young man's face at the sound of his name. He glanced at the woman over his attacker's shoulders and raised his own blade to block another strike. Conrad clenched his teeth. He turned to face his opponent and twisted one of the metal rings on his short staff. The weapon extended and a spear blade sprang out at either end. A loud battle cry preceded the attack of the burly swordsman a heartbeat later. Conrad blocked his blade, kicked him in the groin, and hooked the staff behind his neck. He yanked the man's head down at the same time he drove his knee up into his face. A guttural groan left his adversary's lips, and he slid to the ground, unconscious. A flurry of activity to the right captured Conrad's attention. Another group of men had rushed onto the rooftop terrace of the banqueting house. He scanned the other fighters around him, anxiety twisting in his stomach. He and his companions were now heavily outnumbered. His eyes suddenly widened. The newcomers had drawn their swords and were heading resolutely for the running woman and the wounded man, still fighting at the north end of the building. Knuckles whitening on his staff weapon, Conrad moved to intercept the men. The woman reached the figures at the edge of the terrace. She stepped in front of the injured young man and swung her blade around in a flurry of strikes and blocks at his 3 attackers. Rage darkened her face, and a roar left her lips. The men fell back under her fierce attack. The wounded man sagged behind her and gripped his bleeding limb. Even from a distance, Conrad read the fear and confusion on his features. The man turned and flinched when he met Conrad's eyes. The expression on his face left no doubt in his mind. William Hartwell was the one who had betrayed them. Bile flooded the back of Conrad's throats. Hartwell looked away. His lips moved, forming words that were lost in the stormy night as he shouted something at the men trying to kill him. For an infinitesimal moment, the woman faltered, a flicker of incomprehension flashing across her face. She cast a quick look over her shoulder at the one she was trying to protect. Their closest assailant moved and brought down his sword. The blade arced across her left arm, carving a deep cut from her elbow to her wrist. A cry escaped her lips. She took a step back and warded off another blow inches from her neck. Hartwell moved forward then, anger blazing across his face. He raised his sword and joined in the fray once more. Conrad got to within 20 feet of them before he crossed paths with the 4 men he was trying to head off. He raised the double-bladed spear staff and spun it through the air. The gilded wood deflected the silver swirl of swords that danced toward his body while the jagged tips blurred, slicing and stabbing through flesh. One man fell.